Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. For the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, December 21st, 2025. Happy holidays, everyone, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about number 2 Ohio State's CFP quarterfinal matchup in the Cotton Bowl with number 10 Miami on New Year's Eve. Yesterday, in a defensive slog, the Canes were 10-3 winners over number 7 Texas A&M in College Station. It was Miami's biggest postseason victory since the Canes beat Nebraska 37-14 in the 2001 BCS National Championship game. So look, it's been a minute since the Canes have done anything meaningful in the postseason. 2025 is Miami's first ever appearance in the college football playoff. They did not qualify for the CFP in the 4-team format. Now, despite only 278 yards from the Miami offense, which was a dreadful 3 of 12 on third down, the Canes escaped Kyle Field with a huge win yesterday. The Miami defense carried the day with 7 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and 3 takeaways, including the game-ending interception in the end zone on 3rd and goal from their own 5-yard line. Freshman defensive back Bryce Fitzgerald stepped in front of a Marcel Reed pass intended for tight end Nate Borketcher to seal the victory. It was Fitzgerald's second pick of the day. Junior running back Mark Fletcher, who was a former Ohio State commit, was the lone bright spot for the Miami offense yesterday. Fletcher finished the afternoon with 172 yards rushing on 17 carries, and that included a huge 56-yard run with just under 4 minutes to play in the game to set up the go-ahead touchdown reception by freshman receiver Malachi Toney. And for Toney, the touchdown was sweet redemption after fumbling at midfield with just over 7 minutes to play in the game. The Canes' victory over the Aggies, who were also making their very first CFP appearance, sets up a clash with the number 2 12-1 Buckeyes in the Cotton Bowl in Arlington, Texas on New Year's Eve. That game will be a 7:30 p.m. Eastern kick on ESPN. The early line is Ohio State -10. The over-under is 41.5. Head coach Mario Cristobal brings the Canes into this game at 11-2. Miami finished in a 5-way tie for second place in the ACC, and because of tiebreakers, did not qualify for their conference championship game. The 8-5 Duke Blue Devils, not the Hurricanes, are your 2025 ACC champions. What a strange season it was in the ACC. This will be the 6th meeting between Ohio State and Miami on the gridiron. Ohio State leads the all-time series 3-2, and that includes a 31-24 overtime victory over the Canes in the 2002 BCS National Championship game. Now, the last time the Canes and Buckeyes actually played was in the 2011 regular season. That was the infamous Tattoo-Gate season with Luke Fickell as interim head coach. The Canes won that game 24-6 in Miami. This will be Ohio State's 3rd straight season playing in the Cotton Bowl. As we remember, the Buckeyes beat Texas 28-14 in last season's Cotton Bowl, which was a national semifinal game to advance to the CFP National Championship. And the Buckeyes were 14-3 losers to Missouri in the 2023 Cotton Bowl, which was a meaningless non-CFP bowl game. Ohio State, by the way, is 3-1 all-time in the Cotton Bowl. Now, I want to start by having a look at the Miami defense and how it matches up with the Buckeye offense. Then we'll flip it around and look at the Hurricane offense against the Buckeye defense. Indiana had the best all-around defense I think that the Buckeyes have seen so far this season, but the Canes have probably the most talented defense that they'll see. Miami comes into this matchup with the Buckeyes 11th nationally in total defense, allowing just over 281 yards per game. They're 8th nationally in defensive yards per play, allowing 4.5 yards per play. They're 6th nationally in scoring defense, allowing 13 points per game. They're 7th nationally against the run, allowing their opponents 87 yards rushing per game. Yesterday, the Canes were great against the run. They held a pretty good A&M rushing attack to only 2.5 yards per carry. Now, if there's one chink in the armor of this Hurricane defense, it's against the pass. The Canes come into this game 30th nationally against the pass, allowing just under 195 passing yards per game. And look, in their 24 21 loss to Louisville. Cardinals quarterback Miller Moss threw for 248 yards and 2 touchdown passes on them. Receiver Chris Bell had 9 catches for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. And in their overtime loss to SMU, Mustangs quarterback Kevin Jennings hit them for 365 yards passing, and receiver Jordan Hudson finished with 136 yards on 11 receptions in that game. And in their narrow victory over Notre Dame in their season opener, C.J. Carr, in his very first career start, by the way, threw for 221 yards and 2 touchdowns on the Canes. Also, Florida State quarterback Tommy Castellanos threw for 272 yards on the Canes earlier this season. And even yesterday against A&M, the Canes were a little vulnerable. Marcel Reed, who I don't think is anything exceptional as a passer, threw for 237 yards on the Miami secondary. Reed missed several open receivers downfield that could have gone for big plays. They were throws, by the way, that I don't think Julian Sayin is going to miss if he gets those same opportunities on December 31st. Now, the heartbeat of this Miami defense is, of course, the pass rush, and this is an area where Miami has very few peers around the country. The Canes come into this game 4th nationally in quarterback sacks. They're tied for 9th nationally in tackles for loss, and they've also been very good at forcing turnovers. No doubt because of that relentless pressure that they put on quarterbacks. The Canes are tied for 15th nationally in takeaways with 23, and that includes 3 takeaways yesterday against A&M. The Miami pass rush is bookended by 2 excellent defensive ends in junior Ruben Bain and senior Akeem Mesidor. Bain, who was just named a second-team AP All-American, is Miami's highest-graded defender according to PFF with an overall grade of 92.7. He comes into this game with a whopping 65 quarterback pressures, which leads the team, 7.5 sacks, and 11.5 tackles for loss. Mesidor is Miami's second highest graded defender according to PFF with an overall grade of 92.3. Mesidor leads Miami in sacks with 8.5 and tackles for loss with 13.5, and he's second in quarterback pressures behind Bain with 55. Against A&M yesterday, Bain and Mesidor combined for 18 quarterback pressures and 4.5 sacks. They are the best pair of pass rushers the Buckeyes will have seen since Michigan's Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabu in 2021. They are absolute game wreckers, folks. Another player to watch on this Hurricane defense is senior slot corner Keontae Scott, the Auburn transfer. Scott is their 3rd highest graded defender according to PFF with an overall grade of 90.5. At 6 feet, 192 pounds, Scott is a physical corner who relishes playing the run. According to PFF, Scott is actually their highest graded defender against the run with an overall grade of 91.2. Defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman likes to use Scott in pass rush as well. Scott has 17 quarterback pressures this season, which is a lot for a defensive back, and 5 quarterback sacks. The Miami defense also features a tandem of playmakers at safety in senior Jacoby Thomas, the Tennessee transfer, and freshman Bryce Fitzgerald, who I've already mentioned. Fitzgerald and Thomas have combined for 10 interceptions this season, and like I said earlier, Fitzgerald had 2 picks yesterday against A&M, including the game-sealing interception in the end zone with 24 seconds to play. The path to victory for the Hurricanes in this game is most certainly through their pass rush. And look, we don't have to look too far back to find games in which Ohio State has had trouble handling elite defensive lines. I mean, look no further than the Big Ten title game against Indiana or last season's Michigan game, which, as we painfully remember, were Ohio State's last 2 losses. Against the Hoosiers, the Buckeye offensive line allowed a season-high 5 sacks of Julian Sayin. The Buckeyes will have to have an infinitely better plan for Miami's pass rush than they did for Indiana's. Now, the good news is they have some extra time to figure that out, but, look, Tyler Bowen has his work cut out for him. It seems likely that we will see a change at right guard with Gabe Van Sickle or possibly Josh Padilla, if he's healthy, replacing Tegra Shabola. There are rumors that Shabola needed a procedure of some kind after the Big Ten title game and might not be available for this game. But even when healthy, Shabola has been a disaster in pass protection this season. Against the best pass rushes Ohio State saw this season, Shabola has been at his worst. According to PFF, Shabola graded 32.1 in pass blocking against Texas, 34.4 against Wisconsin, 28.5 against Penn State, and a dreadful 17.6 against Indiana. I think Gabe Van Sickle is likely the next man up at right guard. And look, the Buckeyes, they got away with it in last season's CFP, but this is not the time of year to be experimenting with new personnel on the offensive line. So the offensive line, especially the right side against this Miami pass rush, is the matchup in this game that has me the most concerned. It's the area where I think this game will actually be won or lost for the Buckeyes. Ohio State has to have a good plan on the offensive line for this Miami pass rush. And Gabe Van Sickle, I think, is going to have to play the game of his life, assuming, of course, that he is the starter at right guard. Now, again, if Ryan Day and Tyler Bowen can design a good game plan to protect Julian Sayin, then I think there's actually a huge matchup advantage for the Ohio State offense with Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate against the Miami secondary. I mentioned it earlier, far lesser passing games have had success against the Hurricane secondary. But again, it all hinges on whether the offensive line can protect Sayin against probably the best pass rush Ohio State has faced since 2021. The Hurricane offense against the Buckeye defense is a matchup that, frankly, I'm a little less concerned about from the Ohio State perspective, but I'd be careful about dismissing Miami here altogether because they do still have some really good playmakers on this side of the ball as well. Miami comes to this game 36th nationally in total offense, averaging 414.5 yards per game. They're 29th in offensive yards per play at 6.28 yards. They're 29th in scoring offense at just over 32 points per game. They're 76th in rushing offense, averaging just under 152 yards per game. They're 32nd in passing offense, averaging just over 262 yards per game. And as an offense, they're 28th nationally in third down conversion percentage at just over 45%. Finally, they're 27th nationally at converting their red zone opportunities into touchdowns at 69%. Now, for some context, Ohio State just faced an Indiana offense that ranks in the top 10 of almost all of those statistics, and as I just mentioned, held them to 13 points. Now, the Hurricanes are led on offense by senior quarterback Carson Beck, the Georgia transfer. Beck comes into this game second nationally behind Julian Sayin in completion percentage at 74.5%. He's thrown for just under 3,200 yards at 8.5 yards per attempt, 26 touchdowns, and 10 picks. He's been sacked 11 times, which is pretty good. Against A&M yesterday, Beck was not much of a factor. There was a lot of wind that kind of slowed down the passing game for both teams. Beck finished the afternoon 14 of 20 for 103 yards passing, and he was credited with a touchdown pass to Malachi Toney that traveled about 6 inches in the air. Beck flipped the ball to Toney as he ran in motion, and Toney ran the ball around end for what was officially ruled an 11-yard touchdown pass. But look, that was much more of a handoff than it was a pass. As a quarterback, Beck is about as streaky as they come. When he's on, he can be very tough to defend. But when he's off, he can be downright dreadful, as he was in Miami's 2 losses to Louisville and SMU. Beck combined for 6 picks in those games, including 4 against the Cardinals. Now, Beck has a first-team AP All-American left tackle in Francis Mauigoa protecting his blind side. He also has a dynamic playmaker and freshman slot receiver Malachi Toney. I just mentioned him. Toney leads the Hurricanes in receptions with 89, receiving yards with 992, and touchdown catches with 8. The Canes also have a pretty good receiver in LSU transfer CJ Daniels, who missed 4 games with an injury earlier this season but is now back. Daniels is second on the team in touchdown catches with 7. Finally, and I mentioned him earlier, running back Mark Fletcher Jr., a player the Buckeyes pursued heavily out of high school, is Miami's leader in carries with 158, rushing yards with 857, and rushing touchdowns with 10. He averages just about 5.5 yards per carry, and his 172 yards rushing against the Aggies yesterday were a career high. Great moment to have the best game of your career on the road in a huge CFP game. Now, after Toney and Fletcher, I'm not really sure Miami has anyone that Matt Patricia and the Buckeye defense need to really worry about, though it will be interesting to see how Patricia elects to defend Toney. Will it be Lorenzo Styles Jr., who's a very good all-around football player? He's technically the slot corner. However, he's not great in coverage. Or will Patricia elect to use Jermaine Matthews in the slot? to cover Tony. It's a very interesting matchup there. Probably the only one that I'm really worried about for the Buckeye defense. I think if Patricia can figure out a good matchup for Tony, and I trust that he can, I really like how the Buckeyes match up with the Hurricanes on this side of the ball. The Buckeyes will bring 4 AP All-Americans from the first and second team into this matchup. Caleb Downs, Caden McDonald, and Arvell Reese were first team AP All-Americans, and Sonny Styles made the second team. One thing I really want to see, and I mentioned this in the last pod, I'd like to see Arvell Reese get more pass rush snaps in this game than he has in recent weeks. I mentioned this again on the last pod, only 6 pass rush snaps for Reese against Indiana, and he only has 3 quarterback pressures in his last 5 games. I really think Matt Patricia needs to take greater advantage of Reese's playmaking ability, and I have a feeling we're going to see Reese unleashed in this game. Ohio State is the only double-digit favorite in the quarterfinal round. And I think they'll be playing in front of a decisively pro-Buckeye crowd in this game. Miami fans, look, quite frankly, just don't travel that well. They never have. I think Ohio State fans will turn out in Arlington for this game. I also think the Ohio State defense has a decisive advantage against the Miami offense, though, again, I do think Malachi Toney could be a matchup problem for them if they aren't smart about defending him. With Brian Hartline now splitting his time between Ohio State and South Florida, I expect Ryan Day to be the de facto play caller in this game. And look, Ryan Day has always been really good with extra time to prepare for an opponent. And I also think the Buckeyes should be able to count on good health for Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, with the extra time that they've had off. The only area that gives me real pause, and I've already mentioned it, is the Miami defensive line, most especially the pass rush. And if there weren't 2 recent Ohio State losses in which the opposing defensive line really controlled those games, my concernometer for this game would probably be at a 4 or a 5. But an elite defensive line has been that 2-meter thermal exhaust port in the Ohio State Death Star over the last year or so. So, look, they're facing another one of those in this game. So I'm setting my concernometer for this game at a 7. Again, the line is Ohio State -10. The over-under is 41.5. After the 13-10 loss to IU in the Big Ten championship game, Bill Landis wrote on Substack that Ohio State's best personnel grouping is 12 personnel with Will Kazmarek, Max Clare, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Bo Jackson all on the field together. But that group appeared together only 8 of the first 53 plays of the game. This was before the final desperation drive that Ohio State had against Indiana. If you account for rotating running backs, the foursome of Kazmarek, Clare, Smith, and Tate were only on the field together for 12 of the first 53 plays. Again, this is per Bill Landis. Now, with that group on the field together, Ohio State's offense averaged 11.4 yards per play against Indiana. But without them on the field together, the offense only averaged 3.3 yards per play. I don't think Ryan Day is going to allow that to happen again during the postseason. And in this game, I'm expecting heavy doses of the Buckeyes' top personnel grouping in this game, 12 personnel with Kazmarek, Clare, Smith, Tate, and Bo Jackson all on the field together. I think this game is going to be close, but I think the Buckeyes will pull away for a 21-9 win, and then it's onward and upward to the Fiesta Bowl in the semifinal round against the winner of 6-seed Ole Miss and 3-seed Georgia. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Look for a recap of the Cotton Bowl from yours truly on either January 1st or it might be January 2nd. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.